this comes down to the obvious question, which is not addressed, which is bias, liberal bias. Okay. Jake Tapper's not stupid. He knows that there's liberal media bias, but his constituency doesn't allow him to admit it. So, and he knows that Hugh knows there's liberal media bias. So here he is trying to explain to Hugh, acknowledging that there's liberal media bias, but then, and this is one of the most incredible things in the interview, saying there's even more bias against Donald Trump, and that explains the press's conduct in this case. A10, please.
I think that there are lots of different silos, and you and I have talked about media bias before, and I don't disagree with your perceptions of there being biases in the media. I think that there are lots of different ones. I think that Trump is an added factor. Like, you can talk about media bias against Mitt Romney in 2012 versus Barack Obama, and that, again, I'm not going to disagree with you, but I think the Trumpness of it all adds an additional motivation. But I also think that there is a difference between what we can factually report and what we can comment on through observation. And we, like Alex said, we did focus on proof and not commentary.
The Trumpness of it all. I'd like that unpacked. What does that mean? You can be more biased against Donald Trump. Then he says, we focused on reporting, not on observation. The people they were reporting with, cabinet members, donors, members of Congress, they're not doctors. That's no more fact and less observation than what Hugh Hewitt saw and I saw. He says the Democrats had the conspiracy of silence, but he ignores that the media's did. This is a fake distinction. He acknowledges there's bias, but then he sort of says, well, it's not about the bias. It's about the fact that you have to have reporting. Again, if you watch Joe Biden speak in public, you had the same level of reporting that they got talking to Democrats who saw him in private over many years. Okay. So again, he acknowledges a conspiracy of silence by the Democrats, but he ignores the conspiracy of silence in which he and his colleague participated, A11.
But I think beyond that is the omerta of all these Democrats who saw everything that you're talking about, and were not sharing it with people beyond Ignatius, beyond Peter Baker, who had a couple pieces there, Michael Shear, who had a piece there, beyond Alex, who had pieces. Like, there really was an unbelievable conspiracy of silence.
There was an unbelievable conspiracy of silence. It's unbelievable. But it didn't just involve the Democrats. And again, I get Hugh's philosophy. And again, I'll say I respect Hugh. I'm a big fan of his interviewing style and how well he prepares. But to say there was a conspiracy of silence, you can divide them and say there's two, or you could say there's one. The same conspiracy of silence between the Democrats, the donors, the politicians, the people in the government, in the White House, and the cabinet, and the press. And why do I say it's one conspiracy? Because their motives was the same. The motive was the same, not to help Donald Trump, to make sure Donald Trump didn't win. The brazenness of it, when they have an obligation to the country, whether they're Democrats or the press, the brazenness of it to pretend it's not happening in real time, to watch Joe Biden do things in public that make it clear that if cognitive decline is significant, and to say nothing, or to occasionally say a little bit, but to not to act on debate night like this is some revelatory shock, just like the Democrats did, the press did the same. To do that, that's a conspiracy. And to then write a book that says Democrats saw this in private. Now, again, there's these inconsistencies. Well, you could see it in public, but Democrats saw it in private. Hur saw it and was denounced. They talk about the Wall Street Journal reporters who belatedly wrote a pretty tepid piece, but they get a lot of credit for it, for pointing out some instances where people saw the cognitive decline in private. This is the emperor's new clothes, folks, real life. You don't need private accounts. I welcome the private accounts for history, but you don't need private accounts. You do not, to know that Joe Biden suffered mental acuity decline to the point where there are serious doubts about whether he could do the job. You don't need the book. And yet Hugh Hewitt sat there and aided and abetted, because of the way he does book interviews, he aids and abets this fiction. This fiction is so dangerous because if the media can aid and abet in a way that threatens the safety of the country in order to hurt the Republican candidate, if they can do that, how can anyone have any trust in what we do? How can anyone look at the coverage of anything and say it's on the up and up, that it's a level playing field, that regardless of party or ideology or personality, they're going to try to be fair? How could anyone say that? They did it for the entirety of Joe Biden's presidential campaign, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. They did it for the entirety of that. Then someone writes a book that says this was a scandal involving Democrats and what they saw privately and what they didn't say. Not, this is a scandal involving Democrats in the press because of what we all saw publicly. And then for Hugh to aid and abet that, it's very upsetting to me. I think you can probably tell from my tone. It's very upsetting because this is where the credibility, which has been fraying for years because of the bias and other reasons, this is where the fraying becomes cataclysmic. It becomes overwhelming. It becomes something that no serious person could look at this and not call it a massive institutional failure. Again, I think the biggest one I've seen in American history. I hope that this report, humbly, I hope, gets people to think anew. Forget about the book. Forget about this one interview. Think anew about what happened to America. Think about how outrageous it is that they deny the bias, and yet the bias causes them to be part of a conspiracy. And the country's lucky that nothing worse happened. But my goodness, how could they get away with creating and perpetuating a fake narrative? How could they?